So today we're going to be talking about some exciting topics, I think. We'll start with an overview of today's data privacy landscape. Then we're going to talk about the purpose and the value of consent management platforms. We'll talk about achieving data integrity and accuracy in this new world, and we'll talk about next steps. And of course, we have Q&A throughout. So my first poll question, which I'd really like to ask the audience before we get started. If you have a consent management platform, a CMP, and a cookie banner, how confident are you that both are configured properly? Very confident, somewhat confident, not very confident at all, not very confident, not confident at all, and unsure. Go ahead and answer the poll. Should have popped up on your screen. Okay, the results are in. Very cool. So 6% of you are very confident. 38% of you are somewhat confident. 19% are not very confident. And 38% are unsure. I'd say those are pretty typical responses. So let's dive in. Today's complex data privacy landscape. So why is it complex? Why is today's data privacy landscape complex? I'd say there's really three different areas that are making it complex: the laws, the vendors, and the lawyers. So let's look at each of those individually. Let's start off at looking at how privacy laws keep evolving and keep making things more difficult for us in the marketing world and in the analytics world. It started, of course, with the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation in the EU, which took effect in 2018 and has spread to other countries like Brazil and cities like Quebec and stuff. So that kind of started the whole privacy focus. California came in with a CCPA in 2020. That's been revised to the California Privacy Rights Act, the CPRA, and that came around in 2024. And you can't talk about privacy without having a ton of acronyms like GDPR and CCPA and CPRA. So I'll make sure to keep that going today. Global data privacy laws and compliance have continued to evolve. As I mentioned, Brazil has their version now, and Quebec. And 20 states in the US have implemented data privacy laws of one sort or another. And you can see on this map, there are many that are considering it. I think it'll be a long time before the US gets to kind of a general privacy like we have with the GDPR. I don't think we'll see that for a long time. We're going to have to deal with individual variations that different states put up, led by, of course, California, which started this. It's not just the states that are changing, though. It's not just the laws that are changing. The vendors are requiring more. And the first example of a vendor that required more was Consent Mode V2, which is now about almost 2.5 years old. But there are two things that happened with Consent Mode V2. First, in Consent Mode V1, if somebody rejected cookies, the cookie banner came up and they rejected it. Theoretically, if it was implemented well, there would be no traffic going to Google, either to Google Ads or Google Analytics. So Consent Mode V2 started something called cookieless pings, which is used for behavioral modeling, i.e. sessions, page views, and conversion. And basically, it's saying in that advanced mode, it's saying if somebody rejects cookies, we are still going to send some traffic information to Google Analytics or Google Ads, but we're not identifying the person. We're not keeping the session information. We're not keeping the client ID. We're not keeping any of the normal things we have. We're just going to use it for behavioral modeling. So that was one part of Consent Mode V2. It was Google's attempt to give you a little bit more information about the people who rejected the cookies. More importantly, Google requires a default consent status to be set up. And what do I mean by that? What they want is that when someone arrives on the website, they want everything to be set to denied by default. So ads would be denied by default. Analytics would be denied by default. And this is crucial for Google, for you to send that signal to Google that you have actually set up a default consent status of denied. And we'll see what that looks like in just a bit in the next slide. More recently, Microsoft Clarity, which is a great heat map and session recording tool, they changed their requirements as well. They don't really trust that you, the website owner, are blocking things appropriately on your website when someone says that they want to not be tracked. They want you to prove to them, to send to Microsoft a signal saying, this is what the user actually agreed to. So that happened October 31st, and they're basically saying, yeah, we don't trust you. You have to send us the status of what the user actually agreed to. So they added another step to the people who are working in Google Tag Manager or the marketing people or whatever to make sure that you're sending to Microsoft a signal that the user actually said they agreed to being measured and tracked. So those are some of the big vendor things that changed recently. And let me show you an example of what I mean with the Google consent mode and the default consent status. So this is from a Chrome extension, a really nice one, but it basically shows you what the default state is when somebody arrives on your website. And remember I said that Google requires you to have the default state be set to denied, and you can see that here. There's really two main categories you worry about: analytics and the three ones that are all kind of lumped together under ad. So those all have to start as denied. And then the user can say, sure, I will agree to analytics, I will agree to ads or whatever. So this is what I'm talking about when consent mode v2 requires this. And the interesting thing, if you're doing Google ads in the EU, if you don't send this signal to Google when you send along information about an ad, you will not be able to build audience remarketing groups, and you won't be able to track conversions either. So this is super important for Google advertising in the EU, that you have set the default state and the update state. And the way that gets transferred to Google, we'll just get a little bit in the weeds here, but it's through a parameter that gets sent with every hit to Google Analytics or to Google Ads, the GCD parameter. And it basically says that ad storage was denied by default and granted after the user updated their choice. So this is key. And this is still an area that I find a lot of people don't understand, don't know how necessary it is. And if you're only advertising in the US, it's not as crucial, but you can't really set it up just for the US or just for the EU and not for the US. You kind of do it across the board. So we're recommending that people set up consent mode v2 and be up to date with what Google is requiring. The third thing that I want to talk about, so we talked about privacy laws changing, we talked about vendors, now let's talk about lawyers. And I'm not going to talk about all lawyers, because there are some good ones, but the ones that I'm talking about are the troll lawyers, the ones who are basically have one modus operandi, which is to throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. They're just grabbing stuff and sending you this demand letter. And we have seen a number of these recently, but the demand letter is coming from typically a law firm in California. And what they're doing is, this is the spaghetti stuff. They're throwing all this stuff against the wall. The California Invasion of Privacy Act, the Video Privacy Protection Act, the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, and State Wiretap Act. So what they're trying to do is put all this stuff together and say, okay, according to all these laws, you have broken them, because when I come to your website, I look at the network traffic that is leaving your website via my browser and going someplace, and I can see you're sending stuff to Hotjar, you're sending stuff to Analytics, you're sending stuff to Bing Ads or whatever. And what they're really trying to get to, of course, the really important part is the settlement here. That's what they're after. They don't really care about this stuff. Again, it's just spaghetti thrown against the wall. This is kind of important because it shows that, yeah, we have proof that you did not honor our consent requirement, but we'll go away if you give us 10,000 or 25,000 or $50,000 or whatever. And we know many companies who have gotten these letters and who have settled. These things are almost impossible to litigate. It costs so much to litigate them. So most companies are just going to settle. And while that's an acceptable solution, I know one company that says, yeah, it's just going to be the cost of business. We're a large company. We know we're going to get these. It's not super important to us right now. We'll pay $25,000 at a time. That's the key. It's at a time. If you pay one of those attorney firms, one of those law firms, if you pay them the 25,000 or $50,000, that doesn't mean that another troll law firm the next town over is not going to send you the same type of demand letter. So these things are coming up a lot, and it really started in, at least in our experience, it really started in 2025, where we saw a lot of these demand letters coming up. So we've done a couple of things. One is that we have built a CMP compliance scan tool, which kind of looks at it from the eyes of those attorneys we were just talking about, those troll law firms, and tries to look at a website in terms of where is it compliant, where is it failing, and we've also built a score in here. So you can see this is not a very high score. We've actually seen some lower examples, and we've actually seen some sites, and this is really rare, we've seen some sites that have passed this with flying colors. And I say it's rare because most sites really do not handle compliance properly. There's usually something that is broken in their compliance tracking. But at any rate, here we're looking if there's a privacy policy published, they have the cookie consent banner, if they're tracking before consent, if the reject consent is honored, etc. Actually, it's a great tool that we have spent the last 3 months developing and using, and we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end here. But so that's one of the things we've done because we want to get ahead of those troll lawyers and those demand letters. We want to see what's happening on the website to help our clients make sure they don't get those letters. So back to the demand letter, and let's talk to just about the really important part. This is the thing, this is the money, well, actually, this is the money part, but this is the evidence part where they're saying, yeah, we can prove that your website is not honoring consent. And what does that mean? Let's break that down just a little bit. So if we look at a typical website, someone comes through the website, they interact with your website, and information is going to be sent out to Google Analytics, to Google Ads, to Meta, to Salesforce, to HubSpot, you name it. There are a bunch of marketing or snippets that the data is going to get sent out to. So typically, we really have to look at the sources of those pixels or those tags or those snippets. Those terms are kind of used interchangeably. So if you hear somebody talking about a marketing pixel or a marketing tag or a marketing snippet, they're basically the same thing. It's just some piece of code that is running on your website that is sending information to an endpoint like Google Analytics or some other place. So since these are tags, the place that you would think you'd want them is in Google Tag Manager. They're tags, let's manage them in one place, and that's ideally Google Tag Manager, and ideally in our world because we do almost all our work with Google Tag Manager. And Ed is going to discuss this a little bit more in his section, which is coming up. But the thing is that Google Tag Manager, as great as it is, you can't just look in GTM. You can't just test GTM because GTM can be the tip of the iceberg in terms of those pixels, those tags, those snippets. So the snippets and the pixels, they might be hard-coded in the head section of your website. And that's pretty common. Your marketing people will sometimes just hard-code a tag right in the head section. If you're a WordPress site, you might have those being installed via a plugin. That is super, super common. It might, if you're a Titan client, or WordPress or any other CMS, it might be buried in a page template as well. The Contact Us page, for example, may have some specific Google Ads conversion ID that's going to go out to Google Ads. It could be buried in the body source. If you're ever working with the text on a website and you go to the source, you can go to the source behind that. You can add a marketing tag in there. If you've set up a measurement ID, a GA4 measurement ID in GA4 admin, typically that measurement ID gets sent to one GA4 property, but it doesn't have to. That single measurement ID can go to any other Google property. So it could go to Google Ads, it could go to DoubleClick. It's not limited to just that GA4 property. And this is the hard, well, not the hardest necessarily, but this can be really hard to track down. All of a sudden you have everything set up properly in Google Tag Manager, and this Google Ads tag keeps popping up. And it's like, where the heck is that coming from? And it's because the measurement ID is tied to that Google Ads property as well, or Google Ads account as well. So one more place. It can also be in iframes. If you're using HubSpot for forms, or if you're using for forms or whatever, typically those forms are embedded on your website in an iframe. And an iframe is, like a mini website within your website. So that can have its own set of cookies and marketing tracking, marketing pixels, snippets, etc. So they can be buried in an iframe. And we even ran into this recently, an iframe within a shadow box. So it's like this gets very deep, from just your simple website to a shadow box to an iframe within there. So the point is, there are many, many, many places where a marketing tag can sneak in on your website, and you may have everything else blocked properly. You might have the CMP set up properly for all those other tags, but there's this one tag that snuck in through one of these methods, and you don't know about it, and all of a sudden it shows up in that demand letter saying, look, we have proof that this one tag, you sent traffic out to HubSpot or whatever, even after we said reject. So it is really tricky to get this right. So what you have to do to really nip this problem in the bud, you have to go not just look at GTM, you have to go back to the network itself, back to your browser, and examine all the network traffic that is leaving that browser and going to all the different. And as part of our CMP implementation, we have built an audit tool that basically does that. So here's an example. We run this across multiple pages in 3 different scenarios. Pre-consent. So I've just landed on your website. I haven't interacted with the cookie banner at all yet. What happens at that point? And then what happens post-accept? So I've accepted everything. What happens? And then post-reject, I've rejected everything. I don't want it to be tracked at all. So we look at those 3 different scenarios across multiple pages, and you can see that most of the time this works fine. The post-accept works, and pre-consent and post-reject aren't showing anything, which is great. But you can see we've got 3 that are really not good, because they are firing pre-consent, and they even worse in some ways, they are firing post-reject. So in this particular case, these 3 tags, the Marketo, Reddit, and VWO, were all hard-coded on the website in the head section. And so they weren't running through GTM. They weren't aware of the status that the user had chosen, reject or whatever. So that's a type of example that when we go back to here, you have to look at the network traffic, and that's what our audit tool does. Okay, any questions on that before we go on to the next section? I think we're good. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the purpose and value of consent management platforms, or CMPs. The CMP really has 5 different purposes, which we'll run into, where it's going to capture consent preferences, it's going to control the tags and scripts, it's going to store and update consent, it's going to provide audit logs, and it's going to maintain compliance tools. So at a very broad level, that's what a CMP is going to do. Now, you're probably most aware of it in terms of the cookie banner. This is a pretty typical cookie banner for like you may see this in Wisconsin, for example. This wouldn't be acceptable in California, but for Wisconsin, which doesn't have specific privacy laws, you can just say, we use cookies, and your option is to accept. And if the user knows anything, if they're a little bit savvy, if they want to change things, they might go to the preferences and say, which is what I usually do. Yeah, I will agree to analytics, but I'm not going to agree to ads because I don't want all those ads to follow me around the internet. So this is a pretty typical banner. Here's another one, which is more of a GDPR style one where you have to have accept, decline, and preferences all as separate boxes. So I'm sure you've seen these. You've probably set them up. This is nothing new. One thing I want to talk about just a little bit with these cookie banners, and this is where a lot of companies have gotten in trouble, is they've used dark patterns in these cookie banners. And what does that mean? Let's look at two examples here. So you want to make sure that you're avoiding dark patterns. And this is an example, this is kind of an egregious example of a dark pattern. Great big attention around the accept all option. And you even drew an arrow to it, which I've actually never seen, but you even drew an arrow to it. It's a much bigger, lighter font. It really jumps out. And if you wanted to manage the settings or reject, it's a lot harder to see that. So that's an example of a dark pattern where you're really saying, hey, you really want this option, not these little hidden options over here. So this is kind of an egregious example, but this one is way more typical. Now you may look at this and say, this seems okay, but it actually does have a bit of a dark pattern to it in that the accept all is brighter. It's more colorful. It kind of jumps out at the screen more. So the first thing that you see when you see this banner is really the accept all. And the reject, even though you can read it, it's easier than it is over here. It's still not as prominent and easy to read, legible as the accept all. So you want to make sure that you use something like this where the decline or the reject or whatever, they have to be the same size button, the same font, the same background, etc. You don't want to have a dark pattern like this. And any reputable CMP, consent management platform, is not going to let you create a banner like this now. But you can, there are people who can go in and change the CSS and make it look like these. So just be aware that you don't want this because this can be very bad too in terms of fines. All right, so the CMP is also going to manage the preferences. So here they said no to analytics, and somehow or other, Google Tag Manager is going to read that information. And there's multiple ways, it depends on the CMP, but there are different ways that those two communicate. The important thing is that they do communicate. And then Google Tag Manager is going to say, oh, they said no to analytics. So I have this analytics tag here. They said no, I'm not going to fire that tag. In a nutshell, I mean, there's a whole lot behind that, but in a nutshell, how those two work together. They're also going to provide audit logs. So here's a small example of an audit log where you can see many people accepted all the cookies, but there are some people who didn't. So you want to have, any CMP is going to do this, you want to have an audit log that shows, yeah, I did have the banner up. These are the people who accepted. These are the people who didn't. And obviously, you don't know who those people are. You just know that a visitor to your website accepted or did not. The other thing they'll do that the CMPs will do is provide the compliance tools. So you're going to have a cookie policy, which your legal team may develop, or the CMP will offer one up also. And the cookie policy is how we use cookies to collect personal information. That's essentially what's in the cookie policy. And this is going to include the results of the cookie scan. So every CMP is going to scan your website and try to capture and identify all the cookies that are on the website. You're going to do that scan either weekly, monthly, or quarterly, but you definitely want to have it on a regular schedule. That's important. And one thing that is really interesting is that the cookie scan that these CMPs do is not definitive. It's their best attempt, But cookies can be placed multiple different ways on your website, and sometimes they're not placed until you do some specific type of interaction with an element on your website. So the cookie scan is not definitive. If you know that you're running HubSpot, for example, or JotForms, you will want to make sure that those cookies have been captured properly and classified properly. Another compliance tool is the privacy policy. And this one is how we use your personal information. So the cookies is how we collect it, the privacy is how we use it. And not to bypass that, but this is an important policy as well that, again, CMPs will write for you if you want, or legal teams will do it. And I would say the CMPs that we work with do a really good job of creating the cookie policies, the privacy policies, and the other policies that are required. And for most clients, what comes from the CMP will be just fine. If it's a specialized type of industry, financial, health, or whatever, you're probably going to have a legal team that is going to be looking at those policies and probably writing their own. But for 80% of businesses, the policies written by the CMP are just fine. And then another thing that you need is the DSAR, the Data Subject Access Request Form. And this is a requirement of CCPA, of the California Consumer Protection Act. And basically it says on your website, you have to have a form where I, as a user or any visitor, can come to your website and say, hey, I want to know what information you have on me, and I want to have the option of deleting it. Now, with our clients, we haven't seen a lot of Ds come through, but we have seen a couple, and they're if you're seeing a lot, you can automate the whole process. The form comes in, you can go in, and then you have to look not just at your website, but you have to look at the third party things like HubSpot, because they want to know what information you've captured about them in HubSpot, and other third party tools too. So the DSAR is sometimes automated. Most of the time it's manual because it happens so rarely that someone sends that request through. But here's an example of one. So you have to specify the website. Actually, that'll be on your form. The name, the email address associated, because if I'm asking you to give me all the information about me, typically that's stored with an email. So you've got to provide the email. And then who you are, and this is kind of the interesting thing. So under what jurisdiction are you asking? Because this can be different depending if it's GDPR, CCPA, et cetera. So you might say under CCPA, I want to know, and then fill out the rest of the form. So it's a little bit onerous on the user side. And I don't think that's done on purpose. It's just because there are so many different ways and laws that affect here. You have to know what you're talking about. So if you get a DSAR request form, you have, I think, 30 days to respond to it. But I've seen a lot of those. I wouldn't be surprised if that they grow a little bit. Regardless of whether you see a lot or not, you need to have this on your website. So that's kind of running through what the CMPs do. And I hope you get a feeling for the work that is involved with the CMPs. It's not kind of a jackhammer approach. You're not going in and bulldozing and knocking or drilling big holes in the concrete and stuff like that. That's not how CMPs work if you really want to avoid those demand letters. CMPs are really much more nuanced and detailed. It's often just figuring out, okay, where is this tag coming from? Why is it firing under these situations? Where did this cookie come from? So there's actually a lot of work involved to get these things set up properly. And having the audit tools to know whether you've set it up properly is really important. So I just want you to think that it's not just I put up a cookie banner and I'm all good. No, there's way, way more to it. So if you do all that, then what we're trying to do is help you avoid those trolls and those demand letters. And that's the purpose of our CMP practice. All right, Ed, I will let you bring us home.
Yes, thank you, Fred. All right, so now we want to move on a little bit from just CMPs and talk about achieving data integrity and accuracy. One of the things that Fred talked about, sorry, some technical difficulties there. One of the things Fred talked about was Google Tag Manager. So when we're talking about integrity and accuracy for your analytics, having a strong strategy is one of the first things we talk about. In utilizing a tool like Google Tag Manager, we utilize it with all our clients. The reason we use this is it leads to a much more efficient setup. Everything's centralized. We can do everything in Google Tag Manager rather than going on your site and putting a new script for every, ad channel you're in, or GA4. If you're just trying to get analytics from YouTube, things like that, we can put all the scripts from those different areas into Google Tag Manager. And one of the nice things about that is, let's say in GA4, you're trying to measure lead form submissions. We can set up what's called a tag in there, and then it has a trigger which tells that tag when to fire, right? The trigger will fire based on something like a specific page view, like a thank you page. Once we set that up, if we add Google Ads down the road, we can then move that trigger over to our Google Ads, which leads to consistency between GA4 and Google Ads. Now, just to note, their attribution models are different, so you might always see slightly different numbers, but it's as consistent as you can get because we know you're triggering the conversions off of the same trigger. It also allows us in GA4 to add things like custom events. So you can get at data that doesn't come out of the box within GA4. When you do the normal setup, we can start to measure things that are important to your business. And all of this ends up leading to custom reporting that you can really start to make decisions based off of. And again, you have that consistency between the different platforms, and you don't have to rewrite everything you do at the end. But this also requires a bunch of manual testing. As you go and make updates to GTM, or you start to implement a new GTM container on your website, you need to go in and check that things are firing properly. In this example, we can see that the GA4 generated lead fired multiple times. So you need to check, is that supposed to happen? Probably not, right? You wouldn't want duplicate data. So now you can go in there and fix that. You can figure out what's going on. So that's very important when you're setting things up to make sure your data is high integrity, is make sure it's accurate, right? You should be looking at the back end setup and not just kind of pushing it live once you have it there. You need to go through and fire things and make sure everything's coming over properly. And when I say coming over properly, I don't just mean you look at GTM, test things, make sure it's firing properly on the back end. You need to go to your channels. On the left, I have GA4. You can see all the events coming in. I need to check through these, see if they're the events I want coming in from my GTM setup, see if any are missing, because that's another way to catch one that maybe isn't firing. And then I can see them here. I can go through, I could go further than what we have here and go look at the data and see how many times it's firing and check that as well. But I can see it's here. On the right, I went into Google Ads. I checked an account. I looked at some conversions under submit lead form. I saw the status was misconfigured. So I opened that up, and you can see in here that there's 3 different form submissions on this account. On the right, we can see the status of the top submit lead form is firing. So that's great. We see form submission. The second one has no recent conversions, but it does have some conversions that came in. So that could be a signal that something there was firing and now is not. Something might have changed on your website. Maybe you changed the thank you page, or maybe you have a custom event in the background you're triggering off of that's no longer firing because you changed your form. And then we have the bottom one there. That's a Google hosted one that's not firing. I actually know that these are all how I want them. On the left, we can see action optimization. These are all secondary conversions. So while they are possibly set up correctly in GTM, I can see they're all secondary conversions. In Google Ads, just for those who don't know, there's primary conversions, which mean you measure and you optimize for them. And there's secondary conversions, which just means you measure them. You don't optimize for them. But seeing this, maybe that's incorrect, because normally lead forms should be primary conversions. I happen to know on this specific account, it is correct. We have a different conversion that we use at this point. But if you're going into account and checking things or adding new data to it, it's a good question to ask to make sure it is correct, right? To make sure your data in Google Ads is accurate. Just seeing these things can help uncover problems you don't know about. And then one thing you want to look for is anomalies. If we look at the user example here, we see 10% growth month over month, but then we see from last year 130%. That's a drastic increase. Now it could be accurate, right? They have 2,000 overall users or just over that, but it should at least stick out to you and say, maybe I need to check some other data to see if that is inaccurate. Sessions, which kind of fits with users, because a user would be me coming to your site. A session would be me coming to your site 1 or 2 or 3 times. That's one user and then up to 3 sessions. I can see here, okay, 11% growth month over month. That's on par with what we saw in users. 106%, a little lower than the year over year for users, but still pretty drastic. So I probably want to go in and check, make sure this is working properly. You could find that maybe something's firing multiple times that you didn't catch the first time. Just kind of like, don't just let those numbers pass you by. Look at them, ask questions about them, see if you need to make some changes. Another one I bring up here is conversions. Here we see 30 overall conversions. So it's not a huge number, but we saw 172% growth from last month, 200 from last year at the same time. That should stick out to you. Now with 30 conversions, it could just be you saw that growth recently because you made some drastic marketing change. But also one of the things we've seen lately is with LLM browsers, a lot of sites are getting a lot more spam. So you maybe need to drill into there. Maybe it's not even a tracking issue, but you need to figure out, how can I prevent some spam from at least pushing my conversions triggers by submitting a form, right? So how can you prevent that? That's been a big question we've been dealing with the last 3 months, 4 months. I mean, it's always been a question with digital marketing, but lately it's been a big kind of thing that we've had to deal with almost all our clients, because we're seeing this number spike up. Another thing from this is, how do you get a little more accurate with your conversions, knowing there will always be a level of spam? With things like Google Ads, there's things you can do like offline conversions and that, so you can just kind of bypass the spam number if possible. But then in GA4, you can't really do that.
Ed, let me jump in here just for a second.
Yeah.
I love the focus on anomalies because that's where that's where a lot of the issues show up. And one
Mm-hmm.
of the things a lot of people don't realize, I think, is that within GA4, if there is anything anomalous in any of the metrics, you'll see like a little circle
Yep.
that says we expected 300 visits that day and you got 3,000, for example. So look at analytics for that. And you can also set up anomaly emails to you, and you can specify like what conditions you're looking for. So if traffic dropped to 0, for example, that's not good. Something is broken. You can set up a automatic email to get sent to you when that condition is met. So I love the focus on anomalies.
Yeah, in like a case I've actually seen with the client is, all of a sudden Google Ads, not from our Google Ads account, all of a sudden within GA4 we saw all this traffic from Google Ads, and we are like, what is this traffic? And I was like, we're not sending this. Like, I verified it in various ways from our Google Ads account. And then I was like, you need to go ask internally if someone else is running campaigns. I actually found that their HR team was running some job campaigns that they didn't tell their marketing team about, which led to all this extra data and our conversion rates dropping. So ultimately we were able to figure out where that was coming from. But seeing anomalies means questions need to be asked and answers need to be found. But that also leads us into irrelevant data. I think sometimes a lot of people will set up a report and they report on everything, but I have a lot of clients that are US only. And if you look here, you can see in China, I have no e-commerce conversions, 0. So why would should I be reporting on that data is the question. And I could even make the argument for this client that any data outside of the US isn't important, because it's going to drag down what our actual conversion rate is. And we should, when we get to our final filters or final reports, filter it out and make sure we're just looking at what we're trying to improve upon. Now, maybe the client wants to know about China, in Norway and Canada. That's a conversation you need to have with them, right? So should we pull this data out? And if so, how do we do it so everyone understands we're only looking at this specific traffic, right? So you want to make sure you're getting rid of irrelevant data. I don't necessarily need to fix anything. A lot of times you're going to get free traffic organically from different countries, even if you're not doing paid ads there. And that's great. And maybe once in a while you get a conversion, but if you have no focus there, maybe it's not what you want to report on. Great conversation to have with your client. It can get you to more accurate data on your website. Oftentimes, some examples is like, you can see Canada there sends quite a bit of sessions. So that can really skew our overall data there if we look at it. So we want to make sure we're reporting on the right things and getting rid of the things that maybe are irrelevant. And understanding context is key. put a date in here with the example that, hey, you hire Fred and Fred puts in CMP for you. After he puts in CMP and it goes live, you actually probably are going to see some sessions drop and some user droppage in your data because more people might be opting out. Maybe that's not the case, but that is one possible outcome. If you know you did that on the 15th and you see that all the traffic dropped on that date, that can explain what happened. Maybe you see a huge increase in traffic on the 15th and you look back what happened on that date. Well, we added Google ads or we started launching a bunch of new content and our SEO traffic went up. Understanding the context of what you're doing really makes a difference. If you see a drop off in traffic because you pulled Google ads and there was no conversions, that drop off of traffic maybe in that situation isn't bad and you should be okay with it. Or maybe you're seeing your conversions go up because you changed something in your campaigns, but your traffic's actually going down. Oftentimes in Google ads, we're actually optimizing for conversions, not clicks, and you can find out if that's a good thing or not. Another thing is avoiding small sample size bias. I think a lot of people do this all the time where they get way too granular with the data on a weekly basis. If you look here, this is from last year. This is actual data from a client from February 3rd to the 9th. It's week 6 there. As you can see, we saw 4 conversions. That's a fairly low number, and questions might be asked of why are we down in conversions this week? But if we zoom out a little bit here, we can see that was actually their best month of the year. So the 1 week was just maybe a little slow, but if you're looking at that 1 week, you might think it's slow when it's really not slow as well. So you need to keep that context in there that things change over time, understand and not overreact, ask the questions, dive in, look at bigger sample sizes of data to make sure you stabilize your view on that. Because right here, right, 4 conversions might look low to you and it's not necessarily bad in that scenario. And another way that can impact you is mature businesses and seasonality. If we look here, we can see we're down about 9% month over month in terms of e-commerce purchases, but we're up 13% from last year. So we can actually see, a lot of people just look month over month, but as things happen, hey, if you're going into winter and you only sell or a summer product, you might not, your sales should probably naturally go down, right? But you can actually see you're doing a better job than last year. So that's actually growth. And if you step back and look at your data at that longer view, you can see here for this client, they have huge growth going into spring and into summer. And then as summer starts to get midsummer, it starts to drop down. And that's pretty consistent over this 2-year period. So if you look at that, you can understand as your business matures, what type of seasonal trends you should expect and not get overly worried if you see a month over month decrease. It might just be seasonality. Sometimes that's very obvious up front. Sometimes that's not as obvious. I think a lot of times, if you're B2B, companies might be very stingy with budgets end of year because they're trying to get their next year budgets approved. And after the new year, they start spending money again and you see that money come through. You should be prepared about that if you know that. So looking at these bigger sample sizes of data can help answer if this trend is just small and not worth looking at, or not necessarily not worth looking at, but like not telling the right story or you're misinterpreting it, or if it fits the bigger narrative and it is what you should expect. But with that being said, you still need to know when to take action. I have up here as an example of Bryce Harper facing a Brewers pitcher. He went up there knowing this pitcher threw a lot of balls, walked a lot of guys, and he decided he wasn't going to swing. It was very obvious in what he did in his body language. He ended up striking out because he didn't change his approach mid at bat. You need to make adjustments when data comes in, when they make sense, but make sure you're checking everything else. So I don't want to tell you never to take action. Just make sure you know when to take action. You're asking the right questions first so you don't make a bad decision on a small sample or maybe a seasonal trend that you should expect, that you're making good decisions that have long-term positive impacts. So there's some takeaways from here. Consistency is key with data integrity and accuracy. If you can measure things and fire it from one location like Google Tag Manager, that's really going to help keep consistency in what you do and efficiency. Testing and checking things is highly important. You need to kind of look at things. Things change. Remember, you might set something up and then someone else within your business might come and change something you weren't even aware about, and it might change your data. So you need to test, check, come back at a later date if you see anomalies, things like that. Understand when your data tells you to check it, right? Look for things like anomalies and know when to take action and not to take action.
And actually, Ed, let me
Yeah.
just jump in there for a bit. So I want to expand on one point that you made, which I thought was really good. One is when you set up a CMP, a consent management platform, your traffic is typically going to go down because a certain percentage, sometimes as high as 50% or more, will say, no, reject all. So in terms of Google Analytics, Google Analytics has never been a source of truth. All it is a trends tool. I mean, you look at it to see what's happening with the trends. You don't look at it as there were exactly 8,423 people who visited me last month. So for the people who do come to your website, man, you want to make sure that you have really buttoned up all your attribution tools. So for your email campaigns, you want to make sure you have a really solid UTM structure in place so that you know the things are coming from email. If you're running Google Ads or Bing Ads, you want to have really good called LPERLs, landing page URLs, these little query parameters that get added to the end of your Google Ads that identify the campaign, the ad group, et cetera, that sent that traffic. So if you've been kind of sloppy or not worried too much about trying to really capture the attribution and set up good UTMs, after CMPs, you really want to do that because you want to make sure you know where the traffic that you are getting, where that's coming from.
Yeah, and a quote I heard, I forget who said it, great marketers make great decisions with imperfect data. We want to get as perfect as we can, but no, we'll never be 100% accurate. We're looking for those trends to make strong decisions.
Yeah.
So just circling back to poll questions here. After seeing this presentation, if you have a consent management platform or CMP and cookie banner, how confident are you that both are configured properly? Very confident, somewhat confident, not very confident, not confident at all, or unsure now?
All right, looks like we had a little bit of a shift here, which is not unexpected, but thank you for that insight. I'm glad that you were able to take a look at what we had to present today and then maybe do a reassessment of that. So thanks again for participating in our
So,
polls.
Jim, hold on just a second.
Yeah,
Can I read the answers?
absolutely.
All right. So very confident, nobody. Somewhat confident, 30%. Not very confident, 10%. Not confident at all, 10%, and unsure, 50%.
Yeah, so we had a shift towards the unsure a little bit here to kind of wrap that up. So thank you. We're going to enter into our Q&A session right now, and we did get a very important question that I'm going to pose to both of you. If a user resides in California and accesses the website of our company based in Wisconsin, is the Wisconsin-based company responsible for following California law? And how would this work for an EU user accessing Wisconsin-based company website?
That's an excellent question and one that there's a lot of confusion around, actually. So the law that's applicable is where the user is. It's not where your website is, where your company is. If a user from California comes to your website, the CCPA, the California Consumer Protection Act, applies. So the fact that you're in Wisconsin is kind of irrelevant. It's where your visitors are. And that's like one large client of ours does all their big e-commerce site only in the US. And they actually, if you come from the EU, they just have a page that says basically we don't service anybody from the EU. So there's no analytics or anything on that page. They block it entirely.
All right, thank you, Fred. Just a reminder, we have a few minutes here. If you have a question, go ahead and pop it into the Q&A or the chat. Another question that came in, excuse me, what's the best way to show data to someone who knows nothing about marketing and is only focused on revenue?
Yeah, I can take that one. So if, this is a common type of question we get with things like Google Ads or we're able to show the different channels, how many, it depends if you're e-commerce or maybe lead generation. If you're e-commerce, we can show you how many purchases have come from that channel, how much revenue has come from those purchases, assuming you have this all set up in analytics. And on a Google Ads side, we can show you, the cost for a campaign, the amount of conversions, the cost per conversion, and then in turn, the conversion value with that. So you can show them then essentially a return on ad spend in that scenario. You can say we spent $1,000, we made $5,000, right? So we had huge return on ad spend there. So I build reports like that, and then you can show the cost per acquisition, which says each time we pay $50 maybe to acquire that conversion. On the SEO, same thing, only you won't have the cost, just you'll maybe have to build in your internal cost of work. The other side of that is lead generation. You need to figure out, and this is where it gets a little more difficult, figure out how much a quality lead is worth your company. And the way you do that is you figure out all the leads you bring in, look at your sales funnel and how they get to that final sale. And then you can eventually back up from, okay, if we make $1 million this year off 2 leads and we bring in 10, we can kind of back into each lead is worth what, $100,000 in that scenario, knowing you're only going to convert maybe 2, and then they become 500,000 each. You can kind of build a funnel and kind of back into each lead is worth this much to my company to kind of build that conversion value.
Excellent. Thanks. Another follow-up question. What if you use a CDN for Google Fonts? Is there anything we need to do related to privacy laws, host fonts, or disclose this to the user?
Yeah, that is a tough question. In the EU, that has become a privacy issue because when you're sending the request to Google, you are sending IP address, and so that is potentially considered personal information. So rather, I mean, this is kind of contrary to what a lot of thinking about optimizing websites are, but in some ways it's better to load the Google fonts from your own domain, not have any connection to Google at all. So some nuances there too that maybe we can talk about offline. But yes, I don't think it's really an issue in the US, at least it hasn't come up, but it has been an issue in the EU.
Thanks, Fred. And
Sure.
finally, how can I easily tell if my cookie banner is configured properly?
The easy answer is it isn't. And I'm being a little bit flippant, but I would say, gut guess is that 80 to 85% of all cookie implementations, CMP implementations, are not set up properly, and that's from just looking at a ton of them. So the only way you can really verify is one, testing it yourself. So calling up the developer console, looking at the network tab, and seeing what's happening with the cookies. And even that can be tricky because things can happen so quickly when a page loads that you may not even see it in the network tab in the developers console. So it really is a matter of using specialized tools to look at that. And I mean, we have a couple, as I've mentioned, but there are other ones as well, like verifieddata.com is one that comes to mind that is really good at it too. So it really requires a tool, basically, is the answer.
Thanks, Fred.
Sure.
I see that we have questions continuing to come in. What we're going to do, folks, is follow up with you directly with these questions, if that's okay. We're kind of up against our time here today. But thank you so much for submitting all these great questions, and we will follow up with you. As a special offer for attending today, we are providing a free assessment of your data privacy readiness to everyone who registered for this class today. Ed, if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide for us. Our privacy and data experts will review your site's consent experience, tag behavior, data flows to ad analytics platforms, and how your CMP, if you have one, is misconfigured against GDPR, CCPA, I should say configured, sorry, and key state laws. Simply visit the URL you see on your screen, nwsdigital.com/data privacy, to learn more and to sign up. We do have a few coming up here that we'd like to mention. On Thursday, March, our higher ed team is going to present Winning Digital Strategies for Higher Education. And on Thursday, April 16th, we will show how your website data is lying to you. As always, all webinars are complimentary and begin at 10 a.m. Central Time. You can learn more and register at learn@northwoods.com. And if you're looking for information on a specific topic or just want to stay up to date on the latest trends and developments in the constantly changing world of digital, check out our blog. We have lots of really good blogs on this topic today, so make sure to check those out there. We have recorded webinars. This one will be recorded, of course, our YouTube channel, and our Around the Campfire podcast. And lastly, if you'd like to learn more about Northwoods and the many services we offer, from website design and development to website accessibility and digital marketing and digital advertising and marketing strategy, please visit us at nwsdigital.com to explore our services, read our client stories, and much, much more. So that concludes our webinar this morning. I would really like to thank Ed and Fred and each of you for joining us this morning. We look forward to seeing you again at our next webinar. And until then, have a great day and a great rest of your week. Thank you very much.